Still shaking, Dabele decided to call her second auntie Uju. The phone rang again and again, but Uju refused to answer. She tried several times, then decided to send a text explaining that their brother had passed away in the hospital. For hours, there was no response. The silence felt heavy and painful as she wondered if maybe they were grieving privately. But when her phone finally buzzed, she saw a message from her auntie Uju that shocked her to her very bones. "Congratulations, oh! Well done." For a moment, Dabele could not breathe. She read the message again, hoping that she had misunderstood. However, the message was as clear as day. Her auntie Uju was congratulating her for the death of her father. Dabele sat frozen as the weight of the message weighed heavily in her chest. Her father had just died. The man who had protected her mother for years, the man who had raised her with love and dignity, was gone, and the only response from his own sisters was congratulations. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone and stared at the message in disbelief. Dabele called up her husband, who arrived a few hours later to be with her. Obioma saw her swollen eyes and forced her into a tight embrace. His wife had gone through so much in such a short time, and Obioma wished he could take her pain away. For a moment, he thought he had misheard, but when he read the message himself, his face hardened with anger. "How would someone say something like this?" he murmured as Dabele wiped her tears and asked what she ever did to deserve a life like this. Obioma held her hands firmly as he assured her that she did nothing wrong. Days passed and Dabele traveled to the village to bury her father. The moment their car entered the compound, Dabele felt the same coldness that she had felt months ago when she came to bury her own mother. Standing in front of the house were her aunties Uju and Chika. Their arms were folded as their faces were contorted in anger. Before Dabele could even alight from the car, Chika shouted loudly for everyone to hear. "You have finally come to see the results of what you did now, have you not?" Dabele stopped in her tracks as she stared at her in disbelief. "What do you mean, auntie?" she asked as Uju stepped forward slowly and looked her in the eyes. "You killed our brother," she said as everyone opened their eyes in shock. Dabele stared at her shocked. "My father just died, auntie. Why would you say something like that?" she asked her aunties, who ignored her and walked into the house. From that moment on, the compound became hot with tension. Uju and Chika brought their own chef to the house. They set up a separate cooking area on the other side of the compound and announced loudly that they would never eat anything connected to Dabele. "We don't need anything from you before you kill us like our brother," they said as they blamed their brother for ever marrying a useless woman. In fact, they revealed that her mother, Soma, was so lucky that she died before her husband, or else she would answer to everything that was happening. Later that evening, the elders gathered to discuss burial arrangements. As everyone sat in the living room, Uju suddenly stood up and said something that made everyone freeze in shock. She pointed at Dabele and revealed that Dabele was not her brother's child. In fact, Uju revealed that Soma was in a serious relationship with another man when she met her brother, and that Soma got pregnant almost immediately and pinned the pregnancy on Ezenwa. She revealed that Ezenwa once confided in her that Dabele might not be his child. However, he loved her too much to bring such doubts into their marriage, so he accepted the child, not caring if she was his or not. Dabele felt the ground beneath her feet disappear. She could not believe that her aunties were claiming that she was not her father's child. She tried to convince the people that Ezenwa was her father, but the people looked at her with pity as they shook their heads. Dabele stood there and watched as her aunties went further to accuse her of killing their brother. "How exactly did you kill him?" they asked Dabele, who stood there speechless as so many thoughts ran through her mind. Tears poured down her eyes as she felt the cold stares of the people who she knew believed all the accusations levied against her. Dabele wished that her father would rise up and defend her. He was the only one who ever stood by her mother and herself, despite all that his family did to bring enmity between them. She stood there and watched as her aunties convinced the people that Dabele killed their brother in the hospital. After all, she was alone with him when he died and had no one to defend her. Everyone turned towards Dabele as they pointed accusing fingers at her, stating that Dabele had to swear in the shrine of Odum. The elders revealed that it was their tradition that anyone accused of such a crime had to swear in the shrine to prove their innocence. They revealed that if the person was found guilty, Odum would strike them dead on the spot. Dabele summoned the courage to speak as she revealed to the elders that she was not going to swear in any shrine. "I am a Christian and I will never be forced to swear before a strange god," she said as her aunties accused her of trying to use her Christianity as an excuse. "Are we not all Christians?" Uju said mockingly as she folded her arms across her chest. "Or is it only when it's time to answer for your crimes that you suddenly remember your God?" Murmurs filled the room as the elders looked at Dabele expectantly. For a moment, the room felt like it was closing in on her. Her heart pounded heavily in her chest, but something inside her refused to bend. Dabele wiped the tears from her face slowly. Then she lifted her head and looked directly at the elders. "I will not swear," she said firmly as one of the elders leaned forward and began to speak. "You understand what you're saying, young woman?" he asked as Dabele nodded. "Yes, I do, sir." The elder frowned. "According to our tradition, anyone accused of such a crime must swear before Odum to prove their innocence or risk the consequences that will follow." He revealed that a certain woman was once struck with Parkinson's disease after she killed her husband and refused to swear by the gods. The elders warned her of the dangers, saying that Odum would always unleash his wrath on the guilty, whether they swear before him or not. Dabele did not allow this scare her because she knew her hands were clean. She stood her ground, revealing that she did not kill her father. "I will not go to any shrine to prove something I did not do." Her voice was calm, but it carried a strength that surprised even herself. Uju laughed loudly. "You see," she shouted. "She refuses because she knows she is guilty." Chika quickly joined in. "Only a guilty person will refuse the shrine." Some people in the room nodded, but Dabele stood her ground. "I respect you, elders," she said slowly, "but I will not bow to fear. My father raised me to know the truth, and the truth does not need charms to defend itself." Her husband Obioma stood beside her proudly. "She has said that she will not do it," he added firmly, but Uju slammed her hand on the table. "Then that means she has confessed to the crime," she said as she revealed that her refusal was all they needed to know that she was guilty. Chika nodded aggressively as she began to speak. "With that in mind, this girl will not step her foot in our compound on the day of our brother's burial." She pointed directly at Dabele. "She will not take part in anything that concerns our brother. Not the burial, not the mourning, not even his property." Her voice rose with pride because, as far as we are concerned, she is not our brother's child. The room fell silent as some of the elders began to murmur amongst themselves. The accusation had been repeated too many times that doubt had begun to spread like smoke in the room. Dabele stood still in their midst, her heart pounding as she refused to bend to their will. The elders went forward to declare that Dabele would not partake in the burial of their brother. They stated that she had to leave the village immediately as their customs demanded, since she refused to swear before Odum. The words fell heavily in the room as Dabele felt as though the ground beneath her feet had collapsed. Some villagers began to murmur as they could not believe that Dabele killed her own father. "She killed him," they said as they wondered why an innocent woman would be so terrified of swearing before Odum if she was sure that she was innocent. "She refused to swear. Oh, why else would she run from the shrine?" they said as the accusations began to spread like wildfire. Before she could even gather her thoughts, Uju pointed towards the gate and she commanded her to leave. "Leave this compound now," she shouted as she revealed that Dabele had no place in her brother's home. "You have no place here." Chika joined her sister as she accused Dabele of pretending to be innocent. "You killed our brother and you still want to stand here pretending to be innocent?" Several villagers nodded in agreement as they watched the sisters chase Dabele away. "Go back to where you came from. You are a murderer." The insults rained down on her like stones. Dabele stood frozen in the middle of the compound as tears streamed down her face. Her father was dead, her mother was gone, and now the only family she had left had turned the entire village against her. She slowly turned to look at her husband, whose face was filled with anger and disbelief, but even he knew that the situation had already turned against them. He gently held her hand and assured her that her aunties would regret it. "We should go," he whispered as Dabele nodded slowly and got into the car. Her heart had shattered in ways that she could not explain. She had come to bury her father. Instead, she was being chased out of the village like a common criminal. The people now called her a murderer and a killer. They blindly believed her aunties, who for all these years had waited for a day like this. Her tears flowed uncontrollably as they drove away from the compound. Dabele told her husband to drive straight to the mortuary. Her father was being buried the next day, and Dabele could not bear the thought of never seeing him again. She wanted to speak to him the last time, to tell him everything that had happened. When they arrived at the mortuary, the cold silence of the place wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. The attendants led them quietly to the room where Ezenwa's body had been kept. The moment the metal drawer was pulled open, she saw her father lying there, lifeless and still. Something inside her shattered completely. "Daddy," she whispered as her knees weakened in grief. Tears began pouring down her face as she watched the once strong man who had always defended her mother and herself now lay here, silent and unable to move. Dabele slowly reached out and touched his cold hand. Her voice trembled as she began to speak from a broken heart. "Daddy, they said I killed you." The words broke out of her mouth like a painful confession. "They chased me out of your house. They said I am not your daughter. They said I killed you because of your properties." Her tears dropped onto the white sheet covering his chest. "You are the only one who always stood up for us," she cried. "They believed all their lies," she said as her body shook in grief. "Daddy, please, if you can hear me, vindicate me. Show the people that I am innocent. Show them that I am your daughter and that your sisters all lied against me," she said as her voice broke in pain. "I didn't kill you, Daddy. You know I didn't. Please, don't let them destroy my name," she said as she wiped her tears slowly and said her final goodbyes. Her heart felt like it was being torn apart. Saying goodbye was the hardest thing that she had ever had to do in her entire life. Dabele stood and watched as the mortuary attendant closed the drawers. Her heart broke, knowing that when the drawers opened again the next day, her father would be taken to the village and buried in her absence. Dabele felt her heart shatter as she turned slowly and walked out of the mortuary. Outside, her husband rushed to her and held her close to his heart. He assured her that everything would be fine as they both got into the car and began the long drive out of the village. However, what the entire village did not know was that the prayer that she had whispered behind her father's body that day would soon shake the entire village in a way that none of them could ever imagine. The next morning, the entire village gathered for Ezenwa's burial. The compound was filled with people, villagers, relatives, friends. Everyone had come to witness the final farewell of the man who had once been highly respected in the village, but something strange began to happen. At the mortuary, the attendants tried to move Ezenwa's body into the vehicle that was brought to transport him home. However, the moment they placed the coffin inside the vehicle, the engine refused to start. The driver tried again and again, but the vehicle still refused to start. Another vehicle was brought, and the coffin was transferred. However, when the driver tried to start the vehicle, it also refused to start. The one which refused to start previously finally came on, and the people moved the coffin again to that vehicle. But the moment the coffin got into the vehicle, the engine refused to start again. The drivers checked everything: battery, fuel, engine. Everything was perfectly fine, but the moment the coffin was inside the vehicle, the car would die. However, once they removed the coffin, the vehicle started immediately. A strange fear spread amongst the people as they realized that this was not normal. "This is not ordinary," one of the mortuary workers whispered as he told the people to call his family. Ojo and Chika caught wind of the situation and hurried down to the mortuary to see what was happening. When they arrived, a large crowd had already gathered. Drivers, mortuary workers, and villagers stood around whispering nervously amongst themselves. "What nonsense is this?" Chika shouted angrily as one of the drivers stepped forward. "Madam, every vehicle refuses to start once your brother's coffin is inside." Uju scoffed loudly. "Stop saying rubbish and move the body." The mortuary attendants lifted the coffin once again and placed it inside the waiting vehicle. The driver turned the key and the vehicle suddenly refused to start. He tried again and the engine made a weak sound and died. The crowd began murmuring again. "Remove it," one of the elders said nervously as the attendants lifted the coffin out. Immediately, the driver started the engine again and the vehicle started perfectly. A cold silence fell over the crowd as many of the villagers exchanged frightened glances. "This spirit is angry," an old woman whispered, but Uju refused to accept it. "Enough of this foolishness," she snapped as she walked directly to the coffin. "If my brother's spirit is angry, we'll speak to him." Chika nodded. "Yes, let him hear us." The two sisters stood beside the coffin as Uju raised her voice. "Ezenwa, if you're the one causing this trouble, allow them to take you home." But the moment the words left her mouth, she received a resounding slap from an invisible hand. A loud sound echoed in the mortuary as Uju screamed suddenly as her head jerked violently to one side. The people gasped in shock. "Who slapped me?" she asked as everyone looked at her confused, knowing that no one had touched her. Before anyone could react, another invisible blow struck her on the other cheek. Uju staggered backwards in shock as Chika rushed to her terrified. "What is wrong with you?" she asked as she received an invisible slap on her own face. The invisible hand struck Chika across the face so hard that she spun around and almost lost her balance. The crowd erupted in panic as they wondered what was happening. The sisters began to scream frantically as the invisible hand continued to slap them repeatedly. Their heads jerked violently from one side to the other as if someone was beating them mercilessly. But no one was there. The villagers stared in horror. The unseen force continued striking them over and over. Within minutes, their screams became weak and distorted. Their mouths twisted strangely. Their tongues became heavy. Then suddenly, both women collapsed to the ground unconscious as the slap stopped. The entire mortuary fell silent as people stared at the sisters, lying helplessly on the floor. They tried to speak, but only strange choking sounds came out. "Take them to the hospital," someone shouted as the people rushed them to the nearby hospital. Doctors ran several tests, but no one could explain what had really happened to them. Their bodies were fine, but their speech was gone forever. Their tongues had become heavy and uncontrollable. They could not speak properly anymore. The news spread quickly through the entire village as fear gripped the people who were so terrified of receiving their own slap. The elders gathered quickly as they pondered on what to do. "This is no longer ordinary," one of them said as they decided to consult the shrine of Odum. The chief priest entered the shrine and performed the sacred rituals. After a long silence, he came out slowly, his face pale as the elders all leaned forward anxiously. "What did Odum say?" The priest spoke slowly. "Dabele is innocent." The crowd gasped as the priest continued. "Ezenwa's spirit is so angry. He is angry because of how his daughter was treated." The villagers exchanged shocked glances. The priest raised his voice. "Odum has revealed that Soma, Ezenwa's wife, was a very good woman. She was hated and treated unfairly by her husband's sisters. However, his greatest anger is that you chased away his only child, a child who did nothing but love and care for him." A deep silence fell over the crowd as the chief priest revealed that Ezenwa has refused to be buried. He says he will not enter the ground until his daughter returns to bury him. The villagers stared at him as murmurs began to spread through the crowd. Then the priest delivered the final revelation. Dabele is Ezenwa's biological child and his sisters Uju and Chika. They know this. They lied and accused her falsely, all because they wanted to inherit their brother's wealth. The elders looked at each other in shock as the chief priest revealed that they would never remain the same again after the slap. A heavy silence fell over the village as everyone began to regret their role in sending Dabele away. They remembered how they mocked her, how they called her a killer, how they chased her out of the village like a criminal. Now, the truth had come out, and the spirit of the man they all respected had refused to be buried. The elders quickly gathered together. "What do we do now?" one of them asked, as the chief priest began to speak calmly. "There is only one thing that can be done." They all leaned forward. "You must bring Dabele back." The elders looked at one another with shame on their faces. "But how will we face her after what we did?" Another elder asked quietly, as the chief priest revealed to them that they had no choice. "If this is not done soon, Ezenwa will revisit all of you one after the other. he said as the people all opened their eyes in terror. They got her husband's number from the caterer who lived in the village as they called the number repeatedly, hoping that he picked. After several rings, Obioma answered the call. It was on speaker as one of the elders introduced himself to him and revealed that the elders would like to speak to him for a brief moment. "What do you want?" Obioma asked the elder, who for a moment did not know what to say. Then the oldest elder finally spoke. "My son, we have wronged your wife." Obioma frowned. "What do you mean?" The elder sighed deeply. Everything that was said against her was a lie. Obioma could not believe his ears. "What are you talking about?" he asked cautiously, as the elder revealed to him that Ezenwa had refused to be buried. Obioma was so confused. "What do you mean refused?" The elder explained everything. The vehicles that refused to start, the invisible slaps that struck Uju and Chika, how they were now lying in the hospital unable to speak, how the shrine of Odum had revealed the truth that Dabele was innocent, that she was truly Ezenwa's daughter, and that Ezenwa's spirit had refused to be buried unless his daughter returned. When Obioma finished listening, he slowly turned towards Dabele. She had been sitting quietly beside him. He placed the phone on speaker. "Talk to them," he said softly. The elder's voice came through the phone again. "My daughter, we have wronged you greatly." Dabele's heart began to beat faster. "We believed the lies. We chased you away. We called you a killer." His voice trembled with regret. "Please forgive us," he said as the room became silent. Then the elder spoke again. "Your father has refused to be buried without you." Dabele froze. "What?" she whispered. "He is waiting for you." Tears began to fill her eyes again. She could not believe what she was hearing. "Please come back," the elder pleaded, "as the entire village is begging you to return." For a long moment, Dabele could not speak. Her heart was heavy with pain, but she remembered the promise she made beside her father's body. Finally, she wiped her tears. "I will come," she said quietly as she hung up the call. A few hours later, Dabele and her husband Obioma began the journey back to the village, but this time, everything had changed. When their car entered the village, the entire compound was silent. No one shouted. No one accused her. No one dared to look her directly in the eyes, as fear enveloped them all. The same people who had once chased her away now stepped aside respectfully as she walked past. Some lowered their heads in shame, whilst others murmured apologies, hoping that Ezenwa would see how sorry they were. Dabele said nothing. She simply walked into her father's compound as the elders approached her slowly. "My daughter, we are sorry," they said as she nodded quietly. Then they told her everything that had happened in her absence, the vehicles that refused to start, the invisible slaps, her aunties lying helplessly in the hospital, and the revelation from Odum. Dabele listened quietly as tears rolled down her face, not tears of pain this time, but tears of relief. Her father had truly vindicated her and restored her dignity amongst his people. The next day, the burial finally took place. This time, no strange things happened. The vehicle started immediately. The coffin was carried peacefully into the compound, and for the first time since the nightmare began, there was peace in her father's compound. Dabele stood quietly beside her father's grave as the last shovel of sand covered the coffin. Her heart was finally at peace. The truth had spoken. The same people who once called her a murderer now looked at her with shame. Her father had finally defended her, even in his death, and the two women who tried to destroy her life would live the rest of their days remembering the moments when truth slapped them in the face, because no matter how long lies travel, the truth always finds its way back home. The lesson to be learned from this story is that truth can be buried for a while, but it can never be buried forever. Jealousy, greed, and hatred can destroy families and lead people to commit terrible injustices against the innocent. The villagers learned that blindly believing accusations without seeking the truth can cause deep harm, and that those who plot evil against others will eventually face the consequences of their actions. In the end, that Bele's patience, integrity, and faith prove that innocence does not need lies or fear to defend itself, because sooner or later, the truth will always rise to vindicate.